The Belgian educational system with a focus on the region of Flanders. The Belgian demographical landscape. Belgium has a population of 11 million inhabitants and is divided into three main linguistic communities. The French-speaking community, Wallonia, with about 40% of the population, the German-speaking community, with about 1% of the population, the Dutch or Flemish-speaking community, Flanders, with about 59% of the population. Flemish is a dialect of the Dutch language. The capital, Brussels, is considered to be a separate region and is comprised of both Flemish and French-speaking citizens. Brussels has a population of 1.2 million persons and is located within so-called Flemish-speaking territory, but has a majority of French speakers. In Brussels, next to French and Flemish speakers, there is also a large migrant population. Many of these people work in the various international institutions for the EU and NATO, but also came in search of opportunity. Belgium linguistic communities. Responsibilities for educational competence. In Belgium, the different linguistic communities are responsible for the education and educational outcomes of its citizens. Three competences, however, remain a federal matter. 1. The determination of the beginning and the end of compulsory education. 2. The minimum requirements for issuing of diplomas. 3. The regulation of retirement for employees in the educational system. Instruction in each community is provided in the language of the community in question. Compulsory education in Flanders. In Belgium, education is compulsory from the ages of 6 to 18. However, a student is only compelled to attend full-time education until the age of 15. From 15 onwards, students may engage in part-time schooling and opt for a structured learning path that combines part-time vocational education in an educational institution with part-time employment. Lifelong learning is an important aspect of the Belgian Flemish educational system. Important relevant ministries in Flanders. In Flanders, the Flemish Ministry of Education and Training is responsible for all stages of education and training, starting from pre-primary education. Childcare is a competence of the Flemish Ministry of Well-being, Public Health, and Family. Hence, we see that two main ministries are involved in the educational outcomes of the Flemish population, but also care of children with social and emotional behavioral difficulties, SEBDs. Some important aspects of the educational system. Next to the linguistic and ideological divides that characterize the Belgian Flemish education, there are also other important aspects to be noted that affect educational outcomes. These are freedom of education and school choice, homeschooling, school autonomy, school networks or platforms. Freedom of education and school choice. In Belgium, freedom of education is a constitutional right. Every person who has legal status in the country may organize education and establish schools to that aim. The government has the duty to organize non-denominational education. The Constitution furthermore guarantees the freedom of school choice for parents. Parents and children must have access to a school of their choice within reasonable distance of their residence. Homeschooling. Another option for parents is homeschooling. Although education in Belgium is compulsory from 6 until 18, depending on their circumstances, but also justification, parents may choose homeschooling for their children. Homeschooling in Flanders can be organized in two ways. 1. Individual home teaching. As a parent, you can teach your children yourself, or you can appoint a private tutor. 2. Collective home teaching. You send your children to a private school or organize home teaching for your children with a number of other parents. Homeschooled children are obliged to participate in the exams organized by the examination board of the Flemish community at certain points in time. School autonomy. In Flanders, school governing boards hold responsibility over one or more schools. They have a wide autonomy and can decide freely on their teaching methods, philosophy of life, curricula, timetables, staff appointments. The government sets conditions only for the recognition of a school and the granting of financing. Educational platforms. Education from pre-primary through secondary is organized through various networks or platforms of school systems. Education and training that is organized through the government is called official education, officieel onderwijs. Education and training that is organized by a private entity or organization is called free education, vrij onderwijs. This form of education is understood to be government-aided private education. To receive funding from the government, a school must first be recognized by the government of the community. In Flanders, there are three basic educational networks or platforms. 1. Go education, gemeenschapsonderwijs or community education, is the official public, government-aided, non-confessional educational network of the Flemish community. 2. Government-aided public education comprises schools run by the municipal or provincial authorities. 3. Government-aided private education is organized by private entities or organizations. This type of network consists primarily of Catholic confessional schools. More than 60% of schools in Flanders and Wallonia are affiliated with the Catholic Church. Next to religiously affiliated schools, government-aided private education also includes alternative schools, for example on the basis of the ideas of Vrijnet, Montessori, or Steiner that promote their specific teaching methods. The stages and types of education in Flanders. The foremost stages of education in Flanders are traditionally understood as the elementary stage, the secondary stage, which also includes a system of alternating learning and working, but also special needs education, which is targeted for both the elementary and secondary stages. The tertiary stage, higher education, which includes both traditional research universities and the universities of applied sciences, the colleges. The university colleges Leuven and Limburg is a university of applied science in the Flemish community, whose main language of instruction is Flemish or Dutch. In the following slides, we will only deal with the elementary and secondary stages, as these are the most relevant to our project and topic. Elementary education, preschool and primary. Elementary education, basisonderwijs, comprises both preschool education, kleuteronderwijs, and primary education, lager onderwijs. Preschool education is accessible for children from 2.5 to 6 years old. Although not obligatory, most children participate in pre-primary education. Preschool education supports the versatile formation of children and is aimed to stimulate their cognitive, motor, and affective development. Primary education is targeted at children from 6 to 12 years old and comprises 6 subsequent years of school. A child usually starts primary education when he or she is 6 years old. Upon successful completion of primary education, children are granted a certificate. Secondary education. Secondary education, secundair-onderwijs, is organized for young persons from about 12 to 18 years old. Full-time secondary education consists of 3 stages as well as various modes of education. In the first stage of secondary education, a common curriculum is offered. Students only choose a specific direction of study at the start of the second stage of secondary education. The 4 types of secondary education in Flanders. From the second stage onwards, 4 different types or modes of education are offered. A student chooses a course of study within one of the 4 types. 1. General Secondary Education, ASO, which focuses on a broad general education. It does not prepare students for a specific profession, but rather lays a firm foundation for higher education. 2. Technical Secondary Education, TSO, focuses on general and technical theoretical subjects. After TSO, a young person may practice a profession or transfer to higher education. This type of education also contains practical training. Secondary Education in the Arts, KSO, combines a broad general education with an active practice of an art form. After secondary education in the arts, a young person may practice a profession or transfer to higher education. 4. Vocational Secondary Education, BSO, is a practically oriented type of education in which the young person receives general education, but where the focus primarily lies on developing one's personality and social skills, as well as the concrete learning of a specific profession which can be practiced upon completion of the program. Sometimes BSO programs are found within TSO schools. The traditional educational system in Belgium. Combination of learning and working for secondary education. Students who reach the ages of 15 or 16 and do not wish to continue formal schooling may also enter a system that combines both learning and working. All young persons engaged in part-time educational programs must also take part in both learning and working schemes for at least 28 hours per week until they reach the age of 18. Part-time learning and part-time employment are combined for a full-time program and is organized in Centers for Part-Time Education, Centrum voor Deeltijds Onderwijs for Part-Time Education, Sintra Training Centers, Sintra Opleidingscentrum for apprenticeships, where students accept a learning agreement that entails per week 4 days of practical training in a small to medium-sized business or with a self-employed person, and 1 day of theoretical training in a Sintra training center. Guidance centers, the CLB, Centra voor Leerlingbegeleiding. Students, parents, teachers, and school boards may address public student guidance centers for guidance, information, or advice. The services of these centers are free. Centra voor Leerlingbegeleiding CLBs are student guidance centers that offer services for students in the compulsory stages of education, but also support for parents, teachers, and other school professionals. Schools are responsible for education career guidance. CLBs provide them with support when requested. Flemish student guidance centers are financed by the government and serve either official, non-confessional public education, grant-aided public education, municipal or provincial schools, and grant-aided private education, the confessional schools. In Flanders, there are presently 72 centers that belong to one of the three above-mentioned educational networks. Nevertheless, a pupil guidance center may work across networks and support schools which belong to different educational networks. Guidance counseling services for students. CLB services are complementary to what schools, but also the Centra training centers provide. Every school and Centra center have entered into policy contracts or plans with their specific CLB to formalize the partnership. CLB services focus on 4 areas. 1. Learning and studying. Focuses on reading, speech, writing, intelligence testing, fear of failure, learning difficulties. 2. Educational career prospects. Focusing on the monitoring of compulsory education, study choice guidance, learning path guidance, provision of information on the educational system and the labor market, special needs education or certificates, training and working with guidance tools. 3. Preventative health care, medical checkups, vaccinations, follow-up of contagious conditions, information on nutrition, substance abuse, and mental health issues. And 4. Socio-emotional development, behavioral and emotional difficulties, SEBDs, bullying, social skills, etc. Special needs education, pre-primary through secondary. Special needs education, buitengewoon onderwijs, is organized for children who need temporary or permanent specific support. Special needs education is available for children from pre-primary through secondary school with specific physical or mental disabilities, serious illnesses, severe learning disabilities, or serious behavioral and or emotional difficulties, SEBDs. Special needs education is categorized into 9 different types of special needs. Children with severe SEBDs are placed into Category 3 type, but only when other mainstream forms of education have been deemed unsuccessful and when they receive an official recommendation. In order for a child to receive a recommendation to attend a specialized special needs school, they must first go through a process at a student guidance center, CLB, together with all interested parties. For example, the parents, the teachers, doctors, students, of course. In Flanders, there are 52 schools that accept children who are designated as Category 3 students. The M Decree in 2014, or Measures for Students with Specific Educational Needs. In 2009, the Belgian government ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. With a high percentage of children in special needs schools, in an attempt to fulfill its obligation to the UN Convention, on the 12th of March 2014, the Flemish Parliament reformed special needs and inclusive education with the so-called M decree. The M stands for maatregelen, or measures for students with specific educational needs. Before the M decree, teachers received very little training in dealing with SEBDs, and oftentimes children with severe SEBDs were placed in these better equipped, specialized, special needs schools. Male children with migrant backgrounds were disproportionately represented. The aim of the M decree was to make education more inclusive and contain measures to ensure that students with special educational needs would receive provisions and adaptations in order to be able to participate fully and on equal terms in regular schools and classrooms, and make classrooms more representative of the Belgian Flemish society as such. M decree in praxis. The M decree says that schools are responsible for ensuring that they offer a continuum of care to students. From a broad-based general care, schools were expected to go through 3 phases in order to eventually offer an individually adapted curriculum. Furthermore, the M decree consists of 7 assumptions that are based on capacity and student-focused teaching. These 7 principles should be implemented in order to achieve quality education. Amongst other things, there should be an open and transparent exchange and dialogue between students and teachers, but also between parents and community. Teaching consists of focusing on the talents and positive aspects of students' growth mindset instead of their deficits. Goals are clearly formulated from the beginning and worked towards in steps. Transition to inclusive education. Although the government decided on the formal framework and put forward a code of practice for an integrative approach for at-risk children and children who are diagnosed as needing special educational support, individual school networks and schools are responsible for the interpretation and execution of the framework. In 2017, a new support network of teams with special education expertise were added to the system in order to support mainstream education. There are few specific guidelines for schools and support teams on how to organize support, in particular for children with SEBDs. Dual educational system in Flanders for regular and special needs children. Specific guidelines for best practices. Since the government only proposes the framework, the actual framework or model that schools use varies across the 3 Flemish educational networks. Within networks, there is no uniform model. Across networks, the models were even more varied. Many suggestions, theoretical models, and techniques have been proposed to schools by networks to deal with bullying. For example, methods and techniques like new authority, prevention pyramids, sorry box, restorative justice, but also whole school approaches like Kievan. Educational support services. Educational support services in government-aided education provided a toolbox model, for example, a 4 compartments model. Depending on the severity and frequency of behavioral problems, every compartment contains different tools and procedures, but there is also a curative model. Educational support services were provided in partially subsidized public schools. For example, extra training for schools meant professional development, extra training for behavioral problems with preventative and curative models. On social skills of students, for teachers in primary schools, more preventative models were offered. In the end, Since the implementation of the M decree in 2015, there has been a 32% increase of children diagnosed with SEBDs in regular education. 35% more students were expelled. The educational networks were asked to take the initiative to support schools in school development and classroom challenges such as special needs. Each school network created a service which provides educational support through the teams of pedagogical consultants. These rapid intervention teams travel and support schools with specific challenges regarding children with SEBDs. There is no one agreed model on how to educate children with SEBDs in Flanders. Negative stigma of children with SEBDs. Many children who have been diagnosed with SEBDs have a migrant background, which requires a personalized approach and expertise beyond the classification of special education. Controversy and failure. Flanders came late to inclusive education, and there has been confusion concerning what inclusive education means for children without disabilities. Would they receive enough care and attention, and would their needs be met? Since 2014, there has been a lot of controversy around the M decree, especially amongst teachers who did not feel they received enough training to support children with disabilities and SEBDs. There were also complaints that persistent budget cuts and lack of funding undermined the intentions of the decree and made it impossible for schools to properly carry out its principles, even if they wanted to. Many people felt that the M decree was a failure, often because there was insufficient commitment to and investment in new structures to make it a success. Because the commitment to an inclusive education was often divided, the M decree was never fully implemented or received with open arms. Begeleidingsdecreet, or the Guidance Decree, in 2019. In response to continued controversy and failure to fully implement the decree, in September 2019, the Flemish regional government ended the M decree and will replace it with the Begeleidingsdecreet, or the Guidance Decree, which will come into effect in 2021. This new Guidance Decree is similarly controversial, and the exact details are not yet known. Hence, the M decree remains in effect until then. Since the M decree was devised to meet Belgium's and Flanders' commitment to the UN Convention, Flanders cannot ignore its obligation to more inclusivity. Although the new decree is meant to focus more realistically on the needs of each individual child and the services available, it remains to be seen what the consequences will be. In reality, the new decree means that children who had been encouraged to attend regular schools and classrooms might return in greater numbers to specialized special needs schools and classrooms. Thank you for your attention.